an undergrad, like at my work, they always known that was not my strong suit. So,
Interesting. Okay, so that,
I mean, it wasn't never anything bad, but you know, I joke. I've always been a procrastinator. So,
but is it also that you come late to things and stuff like that?
No, I'm on time. It's like, it's more procrastination. That's my issue.
Okay.
So I'm always on
Okay.
time
All right.
and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. All right. But you put things off. And then
Yeah.
do you miss deadlines as a result of that?
No, I never missed a deadline or anything, but I just know I could have saved. It's one of those things where it's like I could have saved myself some stress. But I mean, yeah,
Okay.
I feel like I've gone better about it this semester, just because I can't like spend like an hour or two like walking from campus to home or something. Like I want more time on my hands. So just because of that, I'm able to space out things better. So that's just something I've been working on. So.
Okay. All right. That's a good one. I mean, time management is a really interesting skill. We're going to talk about it a little bit in one of the future lectures, and talk about different tricks of the trade that people use to manage, because it actually is a really good point. It gets harder, I think, as over time, in the sense that as you get more responsibilities and people start counting on you, and then if you're, and by the way, everyone's guilty of this to some degree, and it's really interesting that we often it's also human nature to put things off, and sometimes it can work, because actually a strong deadline, when you feel that deadline, then you can be very productive.
Yep.
Right. So it's not always a bad thing to be to put things off. Right. Especially if you got a very busy, you have to do all these things, and you have like paper reviews and paper deadlines and all these other things. And so if you did them a week early, if you did everything a week early, I think that wouldn't be optimal.
Yeah.
There's a young woman in one of my classes one time said to me, and I thought this was a really good litmus test. And she said, what I do first is the thing that's causing me the most agita. You know that phrase? I don't know where both of you are from, but on the East Coast, agita is like an Italian-American word for agitation, or like almost like stomach upset. Whatever's giving you the most anxiety is the first, she said. And it's really true. Like if something is causing you not to sleep at night, try to, do it first thing in the morning, or try to get it done before you're going to go to bed, because it will help you, So the idea is, what's causing you the most agita? Try to jump on that one first.
Yeah, that's good. It's like my daughter's rule when she's got to eat. She always eats the thing she doesn't like first.
Yeah.
And she saves her favorite stuff for the end.
Yeah, that's another way to do it. So
Okay.
Mallory was talking about time management. Josh, what thing did you say you wanted to work on?
I was focused more on just like general communication skills.
In particular, anything? Like writing or oral communication?
Probably more oral communication if I had to pick one over the other.
And are you teaching this semester?
Nope, I'm not teaching.
Okay. So what steps can you take if you're not teaching to work on that?
I guess the big ones are just working on communicating with my research group, because that's more what I'm going to be doing rather than teaching. So building like professional communication as well as like effective for timeliness and clarity's sake.
Yeah, do you have the opportunities to give an oral report on your research in your research group?
I'm sure I will at some point.
Yeah, and volunteer to do it.
Yep.
So that will put you on the hot seat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, one thing they're doing in here is that we're doing, they did chalkboard lectures without any slides, and then later we're going to do lectures with slides and get some practice on a bunch of tricks of the trade.
Yeah.
But
it sounds wonderful.
Oh, it's very fun, actually. And we also have there's a really fun video of all the things not to do on PowerPoint. It's a comedian's video.
And what's the name of it?
That video, I'll have to dig it up for you. It's somewhere in the syllabus, but Well, I'll find it right now while we're getting settled in here.
Okay, does anyone want to report out on any good ideas you heard from a colleague maybe, or sometimes in these, when you're talking about these things, colleagues can give you some great ideas. Anything come up? Okay, Chai?
My partner was Mackenzie, and one skill she really wanted to, that she felt she needed to improve was her multitasking. And I kind of like when she was talking about this because, you know, as grad students, I do think we end up multitasking more often than we realize. And sometimes it's efficient and sometimes it's really not. We end up just having less effort on one parts and more efforts on other parts. It's just a huge mess. But I think she had a really good idea of just imposing hard cutoffs for certain things. Cause you know, it happens for me where I just do an assignment and I'm like, I'll finish this by 6 and it's like 9 and I'm like, oh, I have all this other stuff to do. And she proposed this idea of just, you know, having a hard cutoff regardless of how far you got. Stop at 6 or something and just move on. And I thought that was like a very smart way to kind of develop that skill and just, you know, get used to having like multiple deadlines and multiple assignments in one day or 1 week.
Yeah, and you know, some people do that when they're grading like a set of papers or problem sets. Because for example, when faculty work with graduate students and they say to the graduate students how much time they expect them to spend on each homework set, for example, you know, sometimes the graduate students think they got to spend hours on it, when in fact, we should try to find ways where we can do it pretty quickly. And sometimes that's where like grading rubrics help. But trying to set a deadline. Obviously with student work, you know, it's going to just stop it and then not have it graded, but this makes you also work more efficiently, usually. And you can also break it down into smaller tasks. That's another way it really helps to work against procrastination, or when you're multitasking, which really is a veil for procrastination sometimes because you're going from one thing to another and you're never really getting anything done. And there's a lot of research I think you probably have heard of that people think they're great at multitasking and actually people are not good at multitasking. So the idea is try to stay focused if you can on one thing. Okay, what is another thing that you heard that was a bright idea that a colleague had? I'm glad that you presented something positive that your colleague brought up. This is also an exercise in collegiality, in really giving credit to your colleagues for good ideas, which is something that we far too seldomly do in higher education, is to praise the work of others. Okay. Anyone else hear something that they thought was pretty interesting? Okay, Chris?
Chris has his hand up.
Yes, Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to say, building on what Chai said, the topic that I picked was also multitasking, mainly because like the semester is just like super busy for me, like a lot going on. And so like, and we talked about like, one of the things Michael asked me was like, when you say multitasking, to you, does that mean like trying to do things at the same time, or like, I was like, no, it's more having a lot going on and being able to prioritize the important things and get the important things done first. And so that's like something that I want to be able to work on, because I do want to be able to get a lot done. And I think like I shared a video with him that I'll put in the chat. That's a TED talk that somebody does about prioritizing what you do, and how the most efficient and like productive people in the world, like the first thing that comes to their mind when they have a task is, does this need to be done? Because if you don't need to do it, like, then you can spend your time on more important. So like, it's just interesting to me and something I definitely need to work on.
And so this video will show people some ideas, but also this question is, does it need to be done, or does it need to be done now? I mean,
right, exactly.
So multitasking, maybe we're using the word multitasking when actually what we're really talking about is the good process of prioritization.
Right.
And keeping away from things based on when it really needs to get done.
And that video actually talks about that specifically. It's like a hierarchy of things that go through their head. Like, can I delete it? Can it be automated? Can it be done later? Can I delegate it to somebody else to do? And then if you get to the bottom, then that's when they do like actually spend time working on that task or thing.
And when you say you don't have to do something, think about what are the consequences if you don't do it.
Right.
Okay. And it's also often it's saying no to something that someone's asking you to do. Sometimes is it showing someone else that you're a good professional in the sense that you know how to say yes to the things that are, you know, where your time should be invested, but no to things that really you don't have the time for. All right. So, you know, that I think people are probably impressed when someone knows how to say no with good reason, or saying that so-and-so might be a better person to ask to do that because they have really the skills that you need or something like that. Okay.
Right. Well, that could be an entire course, how to say no.
Yeah.
Someday we should. I think it is very, very hard. I think especially for students in this, you know, at Berkeley who tend to be extremely, you know, overachievers, and they got here because they say yes to a lot of things, which is really what's wonderful about them. But it is really important to be able to have your boundaries and really think carefully about something that you might want to do, might be interesting, might be beneficial, but you just really don't have time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, this has been a big challenge for me all my life. It's really, I would say that's probably the thing that I'm weakest on, saying no.
Yeah, and the thing is, you run the risk of burning out at some point too if you don't. You have to figure out how you can, you know, you can be an overstriver. When then you're right, most people at Berkeley are, but at some point you probably have found some ways to unwind or to, you know, figure out how to spend less time doing things, and it's good enough. You know, there's sometimes you have to say it's good enough.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's hard. Okay, so let's end here, but this has been really, I hope you have found this useful to really think about the skills that you're developing, and they're tremendous in teaching, and they're going to be of use to you later on. And so see graduate school not just as you're doing a research project that will be your dissertation, but all these other skills that you're developing while you're here that can make you be a better professional later on, and also enjoy your profession more. And you know, that's a goal in and of itself that you should have, or you have the right to have. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Ken, for inviting me back. And I wish we had more time, and maybe next year we'll make it an hour and a half so we can spend a little bit more time in those breakout rooms.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Because again, you said yes when you could have said no, and it was really beneficial for us. It's such an important perspective, and I love the way you phrase it with the skills, because this is a point that we've actually discussed very early on, where a number of the students are in this class they're required, but they're asking, why am I here? This is you know, I want to do research. I want to work in a company. I don't need to know how to teach.
Right.
But this is really what, in a nutshell, you've said in so convincing terms, is that by learning how to teach in this way, you're actually learning all these skills that will actually benefit you in so many other ways. So you can think of this as a course in teaching, but also as just a course in all kinds of professional skills. So thank you for
You're welcome. And
that
I
clarity.
do tell you that coming out and talking to students directly helps recharge my batteries, because there's so many other things that we all do, and find those things that make you energized. And so like if you have a lot of, you know, administrative work, but you love coming and talking to students or whatever, try to find those opportunities in your profession, because that will reinvigorate you. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. A round of applause from all of us.
You. And for you
Thank
too.
You so much.
All of you. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. Bye.
Bye. Thanks
Okay.
again.
Everybody else, stick around. What we're going to do is take a break. I want to give you 10 minutes, and we're going to talk a little bit about the learning assessment. Did you guys do that for learning style assessment? Really fun exercise. If you haven't done it, let me drop it in the tab for you. And then let me just wait. Where is it? Yeah, it's a learning styles assessment. It just takes a few minutes, and here it is. So you just click on that, go through it, and it's going to basically give you an insight into yourself. So it's a very fun exercise. Okay, so why don't we take 10 minutes? What time is it? Yeah, till 5:30. Sound good? Then we'll come back and talk about it. All right. Hello, welcome back, everyone. Amazing that we got most of you could come back. I was not sure. All right, good. So let's talk about I want to talk about this diagram and in particular learning styles. There's a really nice, if you got to the end, at the end of that, there's a page. Actually, let me share it with you. I'll just share the screen. There's a page from there that shows you this learning styles. Can you see it okay? Everybody? Okay. So this is from Felder and Solomon, who are at North Carolina State University. And so they break this down into four axes. So it's like a four-dimensional space. And then you can be a point. You're a point in this four-dimensional space based on your learning style. So let's look at these dimensions first. The key idea here is that there's active and reflective learners. Okay, so there's this idea that active learners, as it says here, they want to do something. They want to try it out. They want to apply it, explain it, discuss it. And reflective learners, they want to just think about it. They want to just take it in. Okay, so active learners like being in a group. They like doing experiments. They like trying stuff. And reflective learners like to, really need some time, just not to be in a group. They want to sit. They want to just think without being distracted or interrupted. And I think this is interesting in the regard of it's a little bit it's related to this axis of extrovert versus introvert. And I think we can all relate to that we're somewhere along that spectrum. And it's really interesting because that is very clear. There's different personality types. Some people just, thrive on being around a lot of other people and interacting. And some, that's very draining for them. And they do it, they like it, but they need to also regroup and they need to spend time by themselves to just absorb things at their own pace, right? So there is, by the way, this is built on there's a lot of personality assessment models out there from psychology. Briggs-Myers is the one that you may have encountered before. But the key about this is to understand that people can be very different on these axes. So in this dimension, think about whether you're active or reflective. And by the way, it may change depending on the subject. It may change depending on the circumstances, right? But in your class, if you're teaching, realize that as you look out over that classroom, they're not all on one end of the spectrum, and they're not all on the other end, and they're not all like you. Okay, that's a really important thing. Okay, and we're going to talk about what your own results were in a minute, but I just wanted you to understand this first axis. Okay, and then it has some suggestions here about if for active learners, a key thing you can do is have these breakout rooms and discussions. That's a really effective step, and it lets people engage and be extroverted. And the reflective learners, you should give them time, and maybe in one sense, there could be the opportunity, and this is where I think, for example, Zoom is very nice because a student who really doesn't want all that commotion can watch it in their own, watch the lecture at their own pace. Okay, so then the next category, the next dimension is sensing versus intuitive. Now, sensing likes to get the details and the facts, and the intuitive want to look at relationships. And it's a little tricky, but it's sort of a details versus overview, right? Like if you're intuitive in their sense here, you see the whole picture, gestalt. You get the overview first, and then you want the details. And I think of it a little bit like inductive versus deductive process, right? In inductive thinking, you collect all the facts, and then you kind of work upward to finding the theory that fits them. And a deductive thinking is just the opposite. You start with the theory, and then you sort of work downward to the facts, okay, or the details. And so this is another dimension that they're looking for. And they're, if the material is very abstract and theoretical, people are, the sensing types they're frustrated because they want facts. They want these details so they can build a scaffolding on top of them, and the overview doesn't work. So you have to think about how can you accommodate them. And so, here it's saying, think of the specifics, try to give the specifics to your students, some specifics. And it's here it's saying, when they say if the teacher does not provide, what it's saying is, well, this is a little bit aimed for like GSIs or TAs, but or student itself, you could go and say, I want to get more specifics. Where can I get them? You could go to the instructor, say if your students come to you, but a lot of times students won't come to you. And that's the most interesting thing, is that you have to anticipate when students are, and think about these different styles of learning. And the intuitive ones, they want the overview. They want to really get the big, what's the big picture, and then work down to the detail. The next dimension is visual and verbal, and that's pretty clear. Visual likes diagrams, figures, images, and the verbal likes text. So they're different ways of learning. Again, it's going to vary depending on the subject matter and the time. But in a classroom, you're going to have students who are very visual and some are very verbal. And so you have to think about those differences. And here it's saying if they're visual, try to give them a certain number of visuals. If they're verbal, make sure you also have lots of summaries or outlines, or also encourage them to work in groups because they can hear each other talking. And then the last one is sequential versus global. And this is, I think this is correlated with the one above here about sensing and intuitive, because it's also about whether you start from the pieces and work upward, or you work downward from a global view. And so here it's about global learners tend to learn in large jumps. They get through things and they kind of, they suddenly get it. Whereas a linear sequential learner wants to learn each piece at a time. And by the way, I think that most engineers like us are more of sequential learners. We really like to build up all the pieces and foundation and then understand something. Whereas many topics in humanities, maybe in philosophy, it's different, right? You don't do that. You kind of feel, and then suddenly it snaps into focus. Okay, so then there's a couple thoughts here about how you can help each kind. It says most college courses are taught in a sequential manner, but if your instructor is jumping around, then when you're studying, take time to outline the material in logical order, and that will save you time. So you can, again, think about if you tend to jump around and you're teaching a class, try to think about how can you organize things in a more sequential way as well. And then for global learners, then to give the big picture, it's saying here that you want to, it's nice to see these overviews, and especially in a class, it's really helpful to be able to say, here's where we're going, with the very general terms at the beginning of each class, certainly at the beginning of the semester, and so they get a sense of how this is all going to fit together from the top down. Okay, so we can look at our individual. Who would be willing to? I'm going to stop the share. Who would be willing to share their resulting screen? Anyone? Okay, I got Stefano here. Good. And Stefano, is it Stefano or Stefano?
It's Stefano. You can also call me Steph.
Steph. Okay. Steph, go ahead and share your screen here and show us your
Sounds good.
what your
Let me just
chart looks like. And actually, it's going to be very interesting to see how it looks, how it compares to our others.
Yeah, I put mine up just on a Word document so I could access it if I ever lost a page.
Good idea. Yeah. By the way, yeah, everybody, once you leave that page, it goes away. So, so do a screen capture or print it or something. Okay, Steph, do you want to talk about what you see there?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, in 3 out of the 4 categories, I have scores that would tell me that I am fairly okay or good at being either kind of learner or thinker. However, the one that is in stark contrast to those is visual verbal category, where I'm much more of a visual learner and thinker.
Good. Okay. So when we were just talking about these, the different categories, right? How did that resonate with you? What we were saying about the visual learner, that you much prefer images over text. Does that
Yeah,
make sense to
definitely.
you?
Yeah, definitely. Like even when I'm like I'm a material scientist, so when I'm reading journal articles, I tend to gravitate it immediately to the first figure or scheme, just to have a better idea of like what's going on in the paper, and then like I'll read through the paper after that.
Great. Okay, good. Yeah, that's a great example. Where in reading research papers, it's very interesting because a lot of times the papers are submitted and they put the figures at the end. And you have to scroll all the way down to see the figures and jump back and forth. And I'm always like, give me the figure. I need to see that image to start out. And I also spend a lot of time with my students choosing the image. The very first image of a paper is always the first. The anchor image is super important. And I find it makes a huge difference in acceptance if the first image really tells the story. So we spend a lot of time on that. So good. So that you respond to that too. And then, but the others are pretty balanced.
Yep.
That's good. Yeah. So that's actually interesting. So what that says is that you don't have a strong preference, right? You kind of can work with both extremes. Let me just ask you, Steph, is English your native language?
Pretty much. I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household.
Oh, okay. But that's interesting.
I grew up here in the Bay Area.
Okay, but you speak Spanish too?
Yeah.
Presumably. Okay. All right. Very interesting. Okay. Good. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, if you don't mind, unshare that. And who else wants to? Mackenzie, I see your hands up. Salim, I see you too. I appreciate it. But let me give some other people a chance here because I want to get some different views. Mackenzie, share yours. And I particularly, if you're interested, share if you have something that's fairly different than what we've seen before. So,
yeah. Can I interject with just a really quick point? So yeah. I heard Steph when he was describing like the way he was saying like better at this versus that. When something I really focused on when I was reading the assessment, that it's about preference. It's not about what, because I don't know. I thought this might be a question for discussion too. So is this assessment for like what you're good at or how you prefer to learn? Because I feel like those are two different things. That's
a great question. Okay, good. Thank you for making that clarification. I think okay, let me try and answer. I think what they're trying to do is assess what you prefer with the presumption that that's what you're good at in some way. But maybe that's not always true. I mean, the way it's asked, all the questions were like, do you prefer this or that, right?
Can I make a point?
Yeah, please.
The way I think about it is that you're much more practiced in your preferred way, and you're almost, I feel like, naturally better at it. So that's the way I was thinking about it.
I see. I mean, for me, I felt like it was like my answers would have been dramatically different depending on what types of courses I was thinking about or what kinds of things I learned. And I was interested in trying to go and do the assessment multiple times with different sort of ways of learning in mind. When I'm dealing with like a science course or an engineering course, it's just different.
No, that's a great point. Thank you. Actually, it's a great point. I think one of the biggest takeaways we're trying to get to is how much difference there is. And what you're making a point of is it's difference even within one person. And it depends on the topic. Good. All right, Mackenzie, where is we had your image up there, but then there it is. Great. Okay. Do you want to talk about it a little bit? Emma, we can't hear you though. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a really high preference for intuitive and reflective learning. Definitely for reflective learning, I do find active learning somewhat stressful, but that might be because of how it's always been presented to me. So it might be in like the flipped classroom where your grade is based on how you do on like practice problems within that class period.
Mhm.
And so I don't like that because I feel like I don't get to understand things on my own time. And then also for working in a group, I like to work independently completely on the assignment and then work in a group so that I'm like more able to contribute to the group's learning. So that's why I think I'm more reflective. And then in terms of intuitive and sensing, yeah, I don't really like when all of the problems are kind of the same because I don't feel very equipped to solve other problems. So I like a lot of different types of problems to be presented.
That's interesting. Okay. Okay. So let me ask you a quick question, Mackenzie. When comparing this kind of learning you're doing with Zoom, how do you feel about it compared to regular learning in a classroom? Do you see the benefits?
I definitely like it better because
you like it better. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because you know, while class is going on and maybe it's being recorded, I can also have the PowerPoint slides up. So I can always like go back to the previous slide and sort of work out in my head where the professor's going. And then also another thing is I can, before class, I can skim the PowerPoint slides to kind of see what we're going to be doing that class period. So I know what sort of things I need to think about instead of it being thrown at me. Like, let's see. And then also, yeah, I feel like I can learn on my own time more so.
Yeah. This is really interesting. I appreciate you saying that because that's really the thesis behind the essay that I shared with everyone. That I do think there's a number of students who are learning better, and I think it fits my teaching style in some interesting ways. I don't know. I'm really seeing some benefits. Okay, good. And your point about intuitive and reflective in particular is that, you know, there's a sense of being rushed, right? That you can feel in a classroom where everything is happening and you need time to kind of absorb, right? And so the ability to do that, like here in Zoom, you have the time. You can sit back, you can go back over slides, you can watch the whole thing in a recording, right? That's a really nice environment for you. Good. Okay. Thank you, Mackenzie. This is very helpful. All right. I also see Emma is going to share hers. Emma, do you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Any other volunteers? You can just put your hand up. And the nice thing is this keeps track of who's volunteering.
Cool. So this is mine.
Oh, okay. Yes.
It's actually not very different from Mackenzie's, except I think the visual dimension, I'm leaning towards verbal, and I already knew that would be the result when I took the survey because I just realized all the answers I basically would always choose something with verbal communication. And you guys were just talking about like how the figures are the most important thing you would look at in a journal article, and I feel like I do that as well, but I rely heavily on the article's explanation of the diagrams, and sometimes I think it's a little bit frustrating when they don't have a good explanation because I feel like I have a harder time knowing what the figure is about if there's no verbal like summary of what the information I should capture from it. Especially like in some professor might have lecture slides where the whole slide is just like a graph and there's no explanation, and that is, I think that one's something that I struggle with a little bit. And also, I think Professor mentioned like philosophy, and like fun fact is I also major in philosophy. So I feel like that kind of, just because the sheer amount of reading that I'm used to, I feel like I just digest information more directly through some kind of verbal input, like text or auditory, like people lecturing. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, good. So I like seeing this difference. Really, right, because it's very similar to hers, but flipped on the third dimension. And let me just ask, in terms of the verbal, now, is English your first language?
No, Chinese is my first language.
Chinese, okay. And you speak English and what other languages too?
Just fluent in these two. Others, I wouldn't say
just,
I
okay,
actually
just.
know. Yeah.
Just
hardest languages.
Sorry. Sorry.
Okay, no, because I'm just curious about that in return to, multilingual. Because I think this is another thing we should really also be very conscious of, because almost all of our classes have students from many different, who speak different languages. And when we think about that, the facility, I mean, I think that that's really important, that if your students are, if it's, I mean, if you're very, very fluent in a language, that may not be an issue, but I think if you are, it's still a little bit of a struggle to work in the English, and you're learning in that class, in that English, that may, mean that you need, it's going to change your preferences, your learning style. But it's interesting that you are also verbal, so you really like to hear that, read that, etc. And the English, did you find the English to be a barrier at all for you, or no?
Maybe not personally for me, but I definitely see the point of maybe if people are not as comfortable with English, they would prefer some kind of visual aid, like a diagram or something, and then couple with some verbal explanation so that they can learn the concepts, but also like understand what usually, like how to, I guess, these technical concepts, how to convey them in English. So that could be like beneficial for both these goals.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you, Emma. How about just from anybody who struggles with English as a language? In other words, as a second language, or finds that that actually provides a little bit of a barrier for you in learning, let's say, in classes at Berkeley. Is that a factor for any of you?
I can talk about an experience as an undergrad. So I grew up bilingual, English and Arabic. I sort of learned both languages at the same time, like while I was in the US in an Arabic speaking household. But when I was growing up, mainly my learning was, the way I would think about it is, if I learned something in one language, then it kind of didn't matter to learn it in another language. But then I realized, like in college, when I took, for example, a microeconomics course, it was like highly theoretical, whatever. But the point was, there was one problem on the test, and this is something that stood out to me like throughout my education, where we were learning about like how taxation works, and then there was a problem that was about subsidies, and I just didn't know what a subsidy was and like what the word was, but I knew what subsidies are in Arabic, and so I just like left that problem blank. And had I known what the meaning of the word was, I would have been able to like build the logical connection to the math.
I have to say, I'm very conscious of this when I'm writing exams, because you're under very time pressure, et cetera. And sometimes I'll, give an exam that has some contemporary aspect to it. So there'll be words, and I'm really lately, and I didn't do this for the first few years, but I'm much more conscious of choosing topics first of all, and then making sure I can explain them and use language that's not going to be obscure for a student, because you really put them at a disadvantage. If you're giving let's say it's a physics problem and you're talking about something, using a term that they're not going to know, or there's a chance they don't know, that's a problem. Good. All right, thank you, Celine, for sharing that. Listen, we have time for really quick. I want to hear from Robin and Michael before we stop. And Robin, do you want to share your screen? Show us what you've got, what you came up with.
All right, can you see?
Oh yeah, good. That's another.
Okay.
very different.
So yeah, I can make this pretty fast, but the one thing I really wanted to comment on was that when you were kind of explaining and going through the categories, you said that you felt that intuitive and global were kind of correlated. So
Yeah.
this immediately stood out to me because I was like, hey, wait a minute, like, that's not me. And I think kind of the subtlety that makes sense to me is that intuitive is kind of more on the like abstract side, whereas global is more on the big picture side. So I did my undergrad in physics, and like my school is so theoretical that we don't have an engineering program. So I think that probably had a significant effect on my quiz results here, because I've practiced a lot of learning on like the kind of abstract step by step, like figuring those kind of mechanisms out. And I think that is kind of how I continue to learn right now.
Yeah. Which school was that?
U Chicago.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it also kind of raises. Sorry.
Was it U Chicago physics? You said.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it also kind of touches on the question that was raised earlier about like, is this what your preference is or what you're better at? Because I think what you've practiced also has a strong effect on what you're going to see from these results.
Good. Okay, that's an excellent point. Thank you, because that's actually great. So if you grew up in an environment that's really going to give you a lot of experience in one way or another, that's going to shape your abilities and your learning style, because you'll adapt to it, right, after enough experience. That's a great point. That's really interesting. So, okay, the intuitive, but the sequential, so it's very theory-based. Good. Okay. Thanks, Robin.
Add to something about that quickly, just because
Yeah.
I noticed it. Like my undergrad that I went to, I used to be a very reflective learner. But after I went to my undergrad, they like forced us to be active. Like we were supposed to discuss with people. It was just very, very, very active, to the point where now I took that and I scored a 7 on being active. So I think it's really interesting that like, yeah, the place that you went to really does change how you learn now.
That's very interesting. Where was that, by the way?
I went to Carnegie Mellon.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. What?
Oh, I did my undergrad at Carnegie Mellon University.
Oh, Carnegie Mellon. Okay, I went there for grad school. So yeah. Okay, interesting. So all right, very good. Yes, that's a great point. So your environment will shape your learning skill, and that's great to keep in mind. I think it's also interesting. You're right. Schools have different reputations and styles. That's very true. And good. Okay, great. I mean, I would say Berkeley probably has somewhat of a style too. We can talk about. All right. Let's say Michael, was he the last one who had volunteered? Michael, are you still around? Did we lose you? No. Good. Let's see what Michael's got. Wow. Another different.
Yeah, so I was gonna say that mine was kind of the opposite of Robin's, where the sensing and the sequential, these two were the opposite of what she had. And I think that came down to that when for certain types of things, like maybe for things outside of engineering, I like learning based on taking the layers of facts and building them up. But when it comes to like watching my like say my lab group present, or researchers from other organizations come to the school and present, I really like if they give an overview of how they're going to connect everything, and then I can pick it up much faster in their talk if they do that at the beginning than if they just go sequentially. So I think that's how I could think about my learning style.
Oh, sorry. You know, I really like that, because one thing is about whether you use an outline in your talks, right? And certain people will get up and they'll say, here's my outline, here's where I'm going, right? They're very clear. And then as they go through it, they kind of stop at each point along the outline. And that's oftentimes really helpful at getting a sense of where they're going. And other people just jump in, right? And they'll just start sort of winging it. So I like that. That's a really good point. And I think that that's a really good tie-in, how an outline really does help, saying, where are we going? Okay, sort of roadmap.
I like the visual outline too. I was going to say a visual outline, like if they have not only the text points, but if they have like nice figures along with it, then I learned really well. just as a recommendation.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Maybe you're giving me a hint about my own teaching style here, but I also think that speaking of for the visual learners, I think this little tool here is I find really, really interesting because at a glance, you know, we immediately see how we're very different. And that's the biggest thing I want to take away in a very vivid way is that, I learned that fairly late in life. And I can tell you there's a lot of professors who still don't realize that. There's a lot of people who are very, what should I say? I don't want to say narcissistic, but maybe that's the right word. They're just very, they think everybody is like them. And so that's their worldview. And it's really about diversity, it's cognitive diversity and realizing that. And this is something I hope you'll take away from this class in general, but this is such an important thing to understand because if you get that, you're going to understand how any choices you make are going to have benefits and costs for different students. And then how do you balance all that? And you don't want to tilt the whole class to the people who are exactly like you. Because you might be very effective for them, but you're going to leave everybody else behind. Okay, so and even among engineers, and that's the interesting thing too. You would think all engineers would kind of their charts would look the same, but what we're seeing is that that's not true. And so think about this some more, and keep it in mind that you're, you know, for those who are teaching or if you're not teaching, just keep it in mind about any interaction you have with other people. The other people in your lab, your advisor, maybe have a different way of learning and of thinking. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. Super fun. I will see you next Wednesday. Have a good week.
Thanks for the guest lecture and the exercise. That was super cool. I really liked it.
I did have a question before you hop off, Ken, if you have a moment.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I read was that most people are visual learners. So if you're teaching, do you want to hit the most target? You know, I guess kind of like a two birds, one stone argument, and modify your teaching in such a way that you are accommodating the visual learners. So you get more people, I guess, in one swipe, and then you have, I guess, resources you have extra resource on the side for those non-visual learners like Emma, because most of American society is verbal. We have lectures. We have slides, but you know we put words in the slide, and it's really not visual at all. So I guess do we rethink education in America?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think if we had, you know, it'd be very interesting to do an assessment. You know, one version of this I would really love to have is one that I could say give to all my students in the class, and it would aggregate everything together. And sort of give me a view of like what's the mix, right? With error bars. So then what I'd like to know is like, you're right. It might turn out that like for this topic in this class, everybody wants to learn it this way, or most people, right? There's a few outliers, but most people like visual, and most people like overviews and, you know, global, and that would be very helpful to do. So
do you know how the individual questions in the assessment map to one of the 4 axioms?
I don't, but you know, I think you could figure that out. You could reverse engineer it. It's also interesting because it feels like a lot of questions. You don't need, you know, a fair amount of redundancy. So I would cut it down by a factor of 2. But it would be really interesting to redo this as a little, you know, quick and dirty learning assessment, and then pop up the global results. And then it'll be very helpful to see what, you know, as exactly as you're saying, because I'd be curious, and you know what that would be. Would it turn out, for example, that you know, one hypothesis is that everything would kind of balance out, and you'd get, you know, the mean would be right around the middle. I just don't know, and or would it be, you know, regression toward the mean. Or would it be that actually there's some pretty clear correlations for engineers taking a particular class, you know, like a physics, you know, a material science class or intro class, that they are pretty geared on, they're skewed in one direction, and that would really help you teach better. So I think you're right, and it's an open question, because I think these tools are used, but I don't see how they're aggregated. So be a fun little extra credit project. I'm gonna whip that up.
I'm not trying to do any more coding than I have to.
No, don't worry. I'm not putting it on you, but I'm just saying I like your suggestion, because it's a good one, and it would help. So maybe
I really think. I really think that doing the assessment for different types of tasks and different topics is going to yield like different results, because it just like, it was so hard for me to go through the assessment and try to come up with one answer, because when I do like a physics course, like I prefer the professor to like have a blackboard and like solve problems. When I'm doing like a course where the testing is primarily like trivia based, then maybe slides and seeing graphs and seeing figures and seeing bullet points is more helpful in like trying to like prepare. It also depends on how you're being assessed too, like how the tests are going to work out, and like how are you going to be studying? Do you need to do a cheat sheet? Is it cheat sheet? Is it an open book test? Is it a closed book? Are you project based? Not like, it's just
no, there's all those things. No, and I think one other thing is, what I would do is I would say, let's answer this for this class, right? So that narrows it down quite a bit. And say, how would you prefer to learn this class? And do you want to see this and that? And that's how I would frame it. But it would be really interesting, especially if it were like one of these, you know, simple online tools, and you could just point everybody to it during the class and say, do this in the first, you know, 10 minutes. It'd be really interesting just to look at that.
Interesting.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it. See you next week. All right. Bye.